All right, welcome back from the break. So I'd like to introduce our next panel. And today, moderating the panel is going to be Christina Farr. And Christina, she is a San Francisco-based writer, and she covers the cloud computing, health IT, women in business, education technology, and VC areas. And so prior to VentureBeat, she worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, the Next Web, Digital Trends, and among others. And so some of the things that you might notice about her that she likes to mention is that her accent. So I guess we'll get to hear this today. And it sounds like she's lived in both New York and London and enjoys yoga, wine, and hiking. So a lot of Bay Area lovely things to do out here. So welcome. Thank you for moderating today.
Thank you. So I'm excited to be here today for this session. It's on a future in Korea that is going to be driven by big data and cloud enterprise. And these are, words that we hear all the time, but we're gonna hear from a panel of experts about how real enterprises and companies in Korea are thinking about big data technology today, and whether entrepreneurs are building new companies to meet some of the demand. So on our panel, we've got a great group. And first, we have Jung-Sung Park from, he's a professor of industrial systems engineering, and he's going to be giving us a 9-minute presentation on how he sees the cloud ecosystem developing. Yeah.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Jung-Sung Park, just introduced, and welcome to the K-Tech conference. It's really a big success, it seems. A lot of people gathered here. And I will talk about the big data, but I could talk about a little bit about cloud as well, especially how it's going in Korea. It's very hard. On the screen on the right hand side, you can see the subscriptions per 100 inhabitants in different countries in 2010. And as you can see there, Korea is the top in that figure. So there are lots of mobile users in Korea, number 1 in the world. And as you know, these mobile devices, as you have heard today earlier from the speakers from Samsung and Microsoft, these mobile devices generate a lot of data, sense data, social network traffic data, and so on. So this mobile data exploding, and which offers new opportunities to create some new business values for enterprises. Of course, it also creates better utility for consumers as well. So in Korea, especially since the wide acceptance of mobile technology, the data explosion is being experienced. Now, the demand for big data and big data analytics from the public government or private industry in Korea is not growing very well, as you see there. There is a comparison between USA and Korea in terms of how big the big data market is in 2012. And there are lots of reasons why big data is a lot of hypes about big data throughout the world. But actually, how much big data is being used today in companies, it varies a lot depending on which market you look at. So I hope we have time to talk about what's the root cause of not big data not being actively utilized as yet in Korea and somewhere else in the world. Okay, we'll have time. I hope we will have time to talk about that. But there are good startup companies in Korea which wants to develop products and services in the big data field. Quite a few young startup companies has appeared in Korea, especially based on the open source platforms, as you know, Hadoop and so on. Yeah. And as you can see there, Korea big data market is only 1.5% of the global market. And the Korean market in general, in the Korean software market or IT market is about, the software market is about 2.5 to 3% of global market. And 1.5 is even lower than that. So it indicates that the penetration of big data technology in Korean industry is quite slow yet. Okay. Now, in terms of use of big data, there are a few successful use of big data in Korea by large companies like SKT, and some examples must be there. And main use of big data platforms as yet is to replace relational database platforms to open source platforms, because that reduces the TCO of managing data dramatically. So there are many purposes, as you know, of using big data. One of the strong motivation for big companies is to reduce the cost of storing and analyzing and utilizing huge amount of data, right? By moving from commercial relational platforms to open source platforms. That's happening now. That's happening, and I think it will accelerate, because there is a very short-term ROI from doing that. And it's not that difficult. It's mainly technology push. It's technology solutions you adopt. Okay? So that's happening. And as you see, every IT systems have stacks, layers. So in big data as well, there is infrastructure, hardware infrastructure to store data and analyze data. And there is data platforms, like Hadoop has been dominant from the open source community. And as you heard recently, like Facebook released their big data analytics platform as open source, and it will have a big impact on the technology. So this open source distributed data processing platforms are going through a lot of changes. You can expect a lot of changes coming. Like, as you know, Hadoop will release version 2 soon, and it will come with a lot of improvements, especially for real-time analysis of streaming data. Hadoop was not good at that. And more importantly, the better integration with the existing technologies, like relational database, data warehouses like that. Now, if you look at some statistics from surveys. Give me a minute. According to a recent survey, 90% of big data applications are based on relational database still. And out of remaining 10%, a majority of that portion is using flat files. So there's lots of hype about open source platforms, but the speed of adopting this in industry, it takes time. It takes time worldwide. It takes time worldwide. And the speed of adoption will be very different in different markets. Okay? It really depends on, to my opinion, it really depends on the style of management of enterprises. Is employees in the company, are they really do they really have data-centric mindset? Do they use data in daily work? Do they want to look at the data and they want to make analysis of data before they make decisions or they make predictions or whatever? If those companies, which is data savvy, will be fast in adopting big data and create some business values. Those companies which are not used to use data in their daily operation, they may follow the hype, but may not realize any business value. And after a few experimental investment, they turn back and say, it's not helpful for me. Okay? So what is important is you should look at the maturity level of business management in terms of using facts, quantitative data. Depending on that maturity, the market for big data solutions will fly or just stay low. So the platforms are led by big companies, as you know, and worldwide open source communities, the de facto standards, which is dominating the world. So it's very hard for Korea to come up with a better competitive platform in a short time. Of course, there are lots of R&D, research and development initiatives in academia and research institutions to create and improve basic platforms for big data analytics. But in the short term, it's hard to predict that a Korean company come up with a dominant platform for big data. But there are many, many good companies starting up in the higher level of that stack, like analytics solutions, visualizations, the upper layers. So I see this conference is about how American firms and Korean firms can collaborate to produce better products and services and so on. I see a lot of opportunities between Korean companies, which has some excellent products and services for visualization and analytics, and American firms, which has already established platforms. Right? So platform and complementary. Complementary from Korea, platform from US, making a what you call positive feedback between the two. There's a lot of opportunities there. I hope some of those collaborations actually take place through this conference.
Thank you.
Taking too much time, right? I have a few more slides. I'll finish very fast. Now, the government is playing two roles in big data. One is to providing support of research and development in universities and research institutions. But the more important one is especially in Korea, the more important role of government would be to create demand for big data analytics. The government should find good use cases of big data, and that's where Korean government must learn from what American government is doing. Okay? So there will be a lot of great result if governments in two countries work together to find the good use cases of using big data for public purposes, like safety, there are lots of areas where big data can be deployed, used for public services. So I hope the two governments work together so that they develop same kind of use cases and share the experience, share the technology, share the skills, and so on. So that's summarized there. So two governments, I hope, should work together to develop good use cases for public services, and then it will create a market for big data vendors, especially startup companies in each country. And another thing is, in the end, it's the lack of skilled people which prevent the fast growth of this field. So the distinguished institutions which can educate data scientists and so on, big data specialists, many of them are in the United States. So I hope there are some collaboration between the two countries in terms of training people with these new skills. And as I said, the last point is the collaboration between the upper layer of big data stack from Korea and lower stack platform from America. I think there can be a very short-term output from that collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview on the slow levels of adoption of big data in Korea. So we'll be talking more about that in the discussion after. Next up, I'm just going to go through, it's going to be Nagi Prabhu, who's the Vice President of Enterprise Mobility at CA Technologies. And we'll get a good background and introduction to the sort of challenges and opportunities in building a customer base in Korea.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. So, all right. I guess, yeah. So the presentation is supposed to be about big data and cloud and mobility and analytics. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about, from my perspective and from the US perspective, what is happening, and also talk about what, as an entrepreneur or somebody who wanting to create new business in this area, could do perhaps in taking advantage of this phenomena that's happening. So why is that there is so much of big data? So first thing that you need to recognize is that what is causing this big data phenomenon. The Internet of Things is one of the primary phenomenon why the data is exploding, right? So if you look at the chart there, what used to be a big mainframe computer probably generating megabytes of data and things like that has shrunk over time. In less than 30 years, what used to be a room full of computers that are dealing with megabytes or gigabytes of data has become a miniaturized, and the phone that I carry in my pocket today has a lot more power, computing power, and ability to generate data than the computer that actually took the rocket to moon. So as a result, the computing has become more intense, it has become more miniaturized, and because of that, there is a lot of data that is generated every day. And if you think that the mobile devices are one thing that are generating this data, the next thing will tell you that this problem is just getting to become from bad to worse. So they are predicting that there are going to be 50 billion devices. I'm talking about 50 billion devices by 2020, which are going to be internet connected. And each one of them are going to be generating new data, and a lot of data from each one of those devices. And as it stands today, right, the prediction is that each person, each one of us, could potentially have as many as 200 internet connected devices. That's how many we are going to have. Probably our shoe is going to be internet connected, our glasses are going to be internet connected, the jacket is going to be internet connected. And as of now, we are about 1.3. So that is where we are in terms of being connected. And the potential is 200. So there is, as you can imagine, the amount of data that is going to be generated of all these devices that are going to be talking internet. And it is not just that the devices are getting smaller, the devices are getting smarter, right? So if you look at the next slide that says, it is not long ago, perhaps in 90s, I carried a phone like that, and what I did with that was to make phone calls, right? So that's pretty much what it did. It generated one type of data, which was who did I call, how long did I call. And fast forward 15 years, that same phone that I carry, I use it for more than just doing phone calls, but it is generating number of other sensory information. It is generating my location, it is generating the temperature, it is generating the gesture, picking up the light, it is picking up my position, whether it is horizontal or vertical, and the other devices are going to pick up my mood, perhaps one of these days, my blood type, or my count on diabetes on a regular basis. So the amount of data that is getting generated by each one of these devices, the number of devices is increasing, and each one of these devices are generating magnitude of data of different types, right? So that is complicating the thing further. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine recently. He built this small device that you can attach to anything, and it generates the position, temperature, light, and motion. So it generates 4 or 5 types of information, and it is able to constantly communicate that to a cloud and generating data. And that is what is causing this kind of a curve in the data growth. So that is a real example of an hockey stick of the growth. And I think what is happening in enterprises, and the mobility is absolutely adding to that perfect storm. So the data growth is going completely out of control, and what is happening in enterprises is they are not knowing what to collect. They are collecting everything. It's becoming like a rat pack. So people are pack rats. So they are like pack rats. They got a Hadoop, they got Amazon S3, and they start collecting data, and they start paying for it. In fact, I was advising to a company who was trying to collect this kind of data, and they got so far where they were not able to delete that unnecessary data fast enough. Then they were able to collect, because the database was not able to keep up. As a result, they were in a vicious circle of ever-growing data and writing bigger check to Amazon on a monthly basis, bigger check every month. And they couldn't figure out how to stop that phenomena. And that is exactly what is happening in enterprises. Every enterprise is collecting data, hoping that they are going to get some golden nugget out of that, but they are not knowing what to look for and where to look for the data or information. So this is just a joke that tells you, if you don't know, this is the kind of results that you get out of the big data. So the joke says that there is a correlation between owning a cat and getting hit by lightning. This is exactly kind of phenomenon that you get by collecting data without knowing what you are going to look for. It is like me saying that I have a big backyard, so I'm going to drill a hole and start exploring oil out of it. That's not going to happen, right? So I think the important thing to know is that what is that you are going to look for in that data before you start collecting the data. So, and I can imagine, I can tell you that the data is the new oil, because there is so much wealth that can be generated out of this information or the data that you are collecting, if you know exactly what you are going to drill out of it. For example, Google is a good example. They probably have spent more money in analyzing data than probably any other company in the world. And their success rate of the click-through went from 0.1 to 1.4 over the last 15 years. That is because they knew exactly what they wanted to do. They exactly knew what they wanted to get out of the data. And even then, their success has been 0.1 to 1.4. But that growth is still 14 times accuracy. And that generated them probably billions and billions of dollars. So it is not about not just knowing what you need to get. You also need to know how far you can go. If you think that Google can put that data up there and say, tell me a secret formula that I want to get when everybody clicks on something, they get exactly what they want. That is not going to happen. They got to know there's an incremental thing that you need to get to, and that is how you get to the information out of the data. But if you missed being in Saudi Arabia and getting the oil money, here is another opportunity to drill the data, and there is enough opportunity to make more money than the Saudi princess did. So with CA, I just wanted to talk quickly about how CA is helping. CA, as you probably know, is a $5 billion revenue company. Been there for 30 years doing the IT management. We are one of the most respected companies when it comes to IT management, innovation. In fact, we have been lately very focused on innovation. So we have created a new business unit which is specifically targeted on innovation around mobility and big data. And what we intend to do in that area, hopefully that will give you guys some hint in terms of where you can focus, is the number one focus area is helping enterprises reach the foresight quickly. It is no good to have the data to know that it rained yesterday. It is good to have the data to know it is going to rain tomorrow. So I think the challenge is going to be not just about collecting data and what to look for, how quickly can you look for that data and you can be able to predict the things before that they happen. I think that is where CA is focused on, in taking the data, securing the data, making sure that the enterprises have the ability to quickly convert the hindsight into foresight and make radical decisions in improving their business. The second thing that we are doing is in the M2M conversation. Like I said, the 50 billion devices, that is connected devices, if you take all the devices, they are talking about trillion devices. So we are focusing on building platforms to help these devices talk to each other. There is no good to have a car that is connected to the internet. It's good enough, but I think the better thing would be when the car knows that, or the system knows that my car has reached my garage, and the garage opener that is connected to the internet automatically opens my garage. That is the value. So today the M2M scenario is that there is a ecosystems of similar devices. There is an ecosystem of connected cars. There's an ecosystem of connected mobile devices. But there is no ecosystem that builds the ecosystem of ecosystems. There is no ecosystem that takes one set of devices and the behavior of those devices changing another ecosystem of devices, and that is another area that we are very focused on. And I think if you are from Korea and from Korean descent, I think you have a great opportunity. There are a few things that are really working for you. So the number one, Korea has probably the fastest internet connectivity around the world. And as you probably know, Google tried to mimic some of that by doing something in Kansas by providing people high-speed connectivity. I think you already have that, so you got to think about how to do it. You have a great infrastructure, and I think what is needed is a much better investment community. It is far behind Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. I think there is an investment community, and also for people to culturally take risks. I think those are the two things that are lacking, but I think there is a huge opportunity for people who want to get the next oil money out of data. There's a huge opportunity that you have there. Thank you.
Thank you. Great background into cloud, mobility, and big data. Especially useful if you want to find the new oil and be richer than a Saudi prince. So always appreciate. Next up, we have Richard B. Dosher, who is the director of the U.S. Asia Tech Management Center at Stanford University, just down the road. So we're excited to have Richard here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to share some things. Hello? I see. That's not my first slide. So I was told that we should talk about what our own relationship is to cloud computing and big data. I represent a research and education center inside Stanford School of Engineering, and we've been doing a study of the impact of cloud computing on industry structure and dynamics for about 4 years now. So this project is completely corporate sponsored by 3 different companies. And we've looked at things like the business software industry, we looked at kind of infrastructure levels of the technology stack, and we also looked at big data analytics last year. This year, we're moving our focus into Internet of Things. So really, if you look at what's been driving big data, it has been improvements in storing and processing and accessing data. And another way to say that is drop in cost for storing and processing and accessing data. There's also been a gradual rise that I've seen over 30 years now of analytics from being a scientific topic of study to being something that's really useful for applications in the real world. Started out with artificial intelligence, and then it went through a data mining phase, and it's finally grown up to be analytics. Social media is probably the biggest single driver of big data analytics right now, because it's created so much publicly available data. And in that regard, I want to get into Korea a little bit. Korea's internet usage rate is over 82% for the entire population, but if you look by age, people between the ages of 10 and 39 are more than 99% of the people in Korea use the internet. Something like 86% of children from the ages of 3 to 9 use the internet. It is one of the highest penetration rates in the world. 97% are accessing from their home, which tells you that there's a lot of consumer application businesses that are available. And 66% of Koreans are using social media. Until recently, there was a kind of closed garden of Korean companies that were on the internet, and we've seen Facebook come in and really make a huge impact in the Korea market just in the last couple of years. So mobile internet is huge in Korea. That's also a driving application for cloud, because any mobile application is likely to intersect with cloud-based data storage in some way. Smartphone penetration in Korea, very high. And the amount of data traffic from smartphones in Korea jumped within 1 year from over 4,000 terabytes in 1 month to almost 8,000 terabytes in 1 month. So that means that social media use via smartphone is also rising dramatically. So the current drivers have been social media, a lot of text. It's also been mobile applications, especially in Korea. And as Nagi mentioned, the immediate point about cloud computing is you can connect almost anything. A coffee cup, a movie ticket, anything can be connected, especially things like automobiles. Electric power meters are very serious new kinds of applications. But you don't really know where your data is. This means that the businesses surrounding big data applications have grown faster than the government regulation systems to deal with issues like privacy, to deal with issues like legal jurisdiction. If your data is stored in Finland, what court do you have to sue someone in for infringing on something that you want to keep private? The value in the data, this also fits very closely with what Nagi says, is not in the data. Data storage is still a cost, even if it's approaching zero. What the value is the knowledge that you can get out of the data. And so this is why big data analytics has suddenly become a new theme. Used to be, I think maybe a couple of years ago in the Valley, when you talked about big data, you talked about Hadoop. Now you're really talking about marketing analytics, you're talking about social media analytics, and increasingly it's moving into the higher value added knowledge creation out of the data. And this knowledge is going to become more and more critically important, something you cannot do without in all traditional industries. Look what's happened with the department stores. Everybody has a system now where they pay attention to your purchasing pattern. They're probably going to try to put that together with your Facebook data and really understand what kind of promotions to give you to improve your or their revenue gaining from you. So that's what's been happening so far. One point about business around big data and cloud computing is that this whole system strongly preferences as-a-service business models. So all the way down from infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, often application software as a service, and one step beyond that would be to sell the service itself, right? Business process services. What you're getting is a lot of, kind of new economics around this. It's lower cost both to the provider and to the user, but it's very much disruptive compared to traditional business software. In the ERP industry, it used to be that revenues came about 1/3 from licensing fees, 1/3 from customization, and 1/3 from maintenance. Suddenly, the licensing fee is spread over the life of a subscription, and this is really pushing towards standard products if you put it on the cloud. So you don't get the customization fee, and the maintenance is tending to be, people expect the companies to eat that. So how companies are going to make profit is a difficult challenge. There's a lot of vertically integrated business models now because people are trying to hedge their bets and get profit from several different areas. So cloud is, however, opening up major new markets, and one of the major new markets that people are looking at everywhere are smaller sized businesses. How can we provide some useful piece of software, some useful service for smaller sized businesses, not just the giant companies who will pay $100 million for an ERP business, for a software suite? So some things to expect. Yes, increasing use of new types of unstructured data. Most quote, unstructured data is now prepared in some way to be sort of semi-structured. It's either tagged or parsed in some kind of way. But we're going to see more video and audio. We're seeing a lot of entertainment content moving to the internet. We're going to see Internet of Things as a similar kind of thing. A lot of sensor data is going to come in. The analytics are indeed evolving. This fits in very closely with what Nagi said. From something that is observing and analyzing to predicting, and then one step beyond that is automatic influence engines. The legal and the regulatory framework is going to follow. That's not going to be a big issue. It's always going to be a continuing race between the people developing new things and people making sure it's a level playing field. So where does Korea fit in? Yes, Korea has a very strong internet infrastructure. It's also got a robust consumer market for early adoption. The business market may be much more conservative. Professor Park's point about that, the connection to business management maturity is a very good one to remember. There are some very interesting initiatives. I'm seeing accelerators. I'm an advisor to K-Startup, and so I'm seeing accelerators in Korea trying to help companies get started, and I'm seeing more online platform services. The whole government emphasis about the creative economy is very much good for an emerging new industry. A lot of big firms, though, still have trouble with open innovation. Many are really the kind of difficulty with selling your product to a big company in Korea is pushing a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of investors into developing their businesses overseas first, then after they grow for a while, they'll go back to Korea. Probably the best opportunities are with partnering with a growing Korean firm. I think that there's a national desire to avoid being dominated by the big foreign software firms. This is something that I think partially accounts for that closed garden. There are some really successful domestic brands that have stood up, KakaoTalk, and until recently, Cyworld as a competitor to Facebook. And I think that the Korean brands are going to learn from Cyworld's example and place more emphasis into internationalization early. Korea is a global play. Korea is a medium-sized market that is about the same size as Germany, and yet the Germans are playing all throughout the EU. I think Korea is going to be an international play. In China, you're still seeing so much domestic rollout of the first generation of new industry that people are really absorbed on the China market there. So I think there are many opportunities for partnership with Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dasher. Very excited for our next presentation, and that will be from Jung-Hee Song, who's a Senior Executive Vice President at Korea Telecom. Thank you very much.
Okay, my presentation pops up, so I can start. I'm so glad I was here last year with a different topic. And as a leading company for public cloud service in Korea market, I'm so glad to give you some Korea cloud computing status and perspectives today. Okay, let me go over. Well, from this slide, we've been already discussed a lot about data explosion. And it's natural for telco companies to become cloud service providers because they can leverage their already existing networks and fixed or wireless network. And the type of services we are giving to Korean customers or some foreign customers as well is mostly server service, but we are offering CDNs or storage is also very, highly demanding, area, and applications as well. And start from the bottom layer, and the upper layers are adding up as new services. And not only Korean public cloud service providers are playing in Korean territory. Actually, a lot of well-known global cloud service providers already entered in Korean market. For example, Amazon opened up their Korean website, and Microsoft also offers, Office 365 as well as their PaaS service Azure. And Google and Salesforce.com are ready to hit the Korean market. And this one shows how we provide public cloud services. And I'm sorry. Well, we have actually 10 data centers in Korea, but among 10, there are 3 cloud data centers we operate, and so our customers occupying more than 20,000 VMs, and at the customer size about 5,000 already. And when we started the cloud services in Korea, starting was really, pity. We had only 150 users and 300 VMs when we started cloud service to public. And now it's been growing real fast. And according to this chart, you see the growth rate is also very accelerating as well. And I will try to give who are our best customers. First area is mobile game companies, and there are major mobile game companies in Korea. 5. Many of them you already know the names like Nexon Mobile, Comtus, or these guys doing pretty good, and they are using our KT Clouds. And Kakao is another Korean SNS platform, and they subscribers 300 million, as far as I know right now. And they are working as a new game platform in Korea, and 50% of their games operating on their game platform is also using our KT Clouds. And I would like to particularly point out there are 2 foreign customers we appreciate very much, and 2 Japanese companies, and their purpose is a little different. And one Japanese company is trying to service their Japanese game to Korean customers directly without any help from Korean publishers. So the price, the margin, dividend will be very high because publishers' margin is gone, because they can serve directly. And also another Japanese company, small company, also offers Chinese mobile through our KT Clouds. So this KT Clouds is working as a kind of Asian, Asian, what they call virtual territory, market territory is formed. So right side shows one of the game life cycle, which was popular one time. Actually, Million Arthur was top #1 game for more than 6 months, and it started out last year, fourth quarter of last year, but they had to increase the servers every day, 20 or 30 servers every day, so they can elastically, respond to users' request of the traffic. And then it's now, a little decaying, so they don't have to worry about those inventory issues. If they invest that much servers on their own, then they really have to worry about the inventories they've been invested. And so much for the public cloud service. Also, for the cloud service, virtual private service is very important area for us. So even it's the same on the public cloud infrastructure, but we kind of segmented for the enterprise users so that enterprise feel this is their private clouds. So we have many enterprise customers among 20 top enterprises in Korea. Half of them are our customers in one way or the other use. And well, the reason we can offer this kind of business cases is we actually push ourselves to use private or virtual private clouds internally. So we are running, we make it mandate every new service, enterprise IT or IT offering to external customers, we have to introduce over our cloud. Okay, this one shows some, one of a press company which is known as a little bit conservative area, and this Korea Press Foundation is introduced this kind of service for 20-some internet news companies in Korea. And they all implemented in our KT public cloud services, collecting news as a sources and then distribution, and then to mobile users, they also use our CDN service. And we have a unique cloud incubation center program for startups or developers. We offer them free of charge 6-month offering of our servers and also 260 cloud APIs so that they can just focus on developing their softwares rather than worry about any infra issues. And also, alongside with this kind of developing issues, we offer physical working area as well. And well, this one shows how we did with government collaboration area we call global KAIST startups. So through this government collaboration, we are supporting many, cloud infra offering, and so that software companies can extend their business quite easily. And we really focus to work with software companies, global or local companies. And the best area we look for is security or enterprise IT, business IT as well. Okay, these are the areas we look for as our partners. So if you are interested in these groups and working in this group, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have time for about 20 minutes of discussion, and if you have a question at any point, raise your hand, and if not, we'll save a few minutes at the end for a question. So just to kick things off, we talked a lot in all of the presentations about the benefits of big data and the cloud, and I think we're all sold on the idea that this is the future. What is the cultural perception in Korea of the cloud? Is it seen as more risky? Is it only something that very innovative startups are really considering in a big way? And also that question applies to big data as well, which is a very sort of trendy new area of computing. So any ideas about how the perception of these new technologies in Korea?
Okay, I would like to give one example which was inserted in in my slides. There is a company called Clasting. It was founded by a primary school teacher in his 20s, and then And his idea was from his master's degree thesis, and his advisor, supported him to create a venture or submit to some competition forum. So he won the prize, but he needed help to how to implement into a real service. So with his high school alumni, he started two men, started this service. Within just 1 year, they are servicing 40 countries. And I heard it's 200,000 classes are using their services. And they never invested in infrastructure because we offer them free. Mm-hmm. So that kind of issues are very, quick startup for ventures who have idea, and good software engineers can easily implement their dream works.
And you mentioned also that the government is very behind promoting cloud and big data adoption.
Mm-hmm. So one of the slides shows two ministry of science, technology, and ICT. They also support this kind of creative ventures because they offer a lot of job, for young graduates, high school or college graduate, which is very, kind of limited these days to find a job. So rather than going to big companies do their, venture, so that kind of incentives are through some national competition of venture ideas.
And one thing that I noticed that stood out to me in your slide was, and in a number of the different presentations, was that the upper levels of the stack, the analytics, seem to be where the most opportunity was for Korean companies. Do you think that there would be much point in a Korean startup trying to build on the infrastructure level and really take on some of the US giants, or would they not have a shot?
Is that to me?
To anyone who wants to jump in.
Anybody on the panel. Well, I think that kind of back to your previous question, in the consumer markets, people are using the cloud without being aware of it. And so culture is not really a big issue there. What you do get is you get a lot of different business culture. The infrastructure versus analytic play, it really takes kind of major resources to be able to get the adoption that you need to be successful in the infrastructure area. If you're doing something like data preparation or data integration that's really a technical service, you can get into that without much trouble. And indeed, I would expect some good things to be coming out of Korea for that. But I think that analytics, I've heard one person say, no longer are applications what it's all about apps. And I think that that is kind of a dominant area. That's probably the bulk of what young people who are writing code for new things are thinking of in Korea.
I think if you are talking about opportunities, there are two ways to do it. So the first thing is, as you probably can imagine, a lot of technologies, particularly in this area, get invented here in California, Silicon Valley. So if you are in a country like Korea, where there is a lot of infrastructure and support and the government stuff, the one immediate thing that you can do is replicate the model. There have been cases in places like India where you go and replicate what has worked here. So there is a lot of opportunity when it comes to big data management, big data security that has been invented here, and there are companies doing things. You can very well replicate that in Korea. That's one way that you can invent, or rather replicate what you have done here as an opportunity. The other way to look at it is you look at your local environment and try to innovate on that. In fact, I don't know whether the companies in Korea believe in doing that, but I have seen companies in the US and UK believing in the infrastructure in Korea as a way to experiment things. Tesco, for example, has this pilot that they run where you have a virtual wall of groceries. You take your mobile phone, scan the QR code, and the groceries get delivered in the house. So this is a scenario where the companies in the US and UK using the infrastructure capabilities in Korea to invent new business models and new delivery models. So I would anticipate that Koreans have an opportunity to use their own infrastructure and innovate things for the local environment. I think there is opportunity in both ways if you are an entrepreneur.
And with this idea of replicating what already is successful in the US or the UK, do you perceive any challenges unique that are possibly even unique to Korea that an entrepreneur should be aware of? Like what significant changes would they have to make in order to be successful in that market?
As far as I'm concerned, I don't see that as a challenge, because it is just a matter of time before Facebook became a big social network there. It is just a matter of time before something like Amazon, I think Korea Telecom is trying that too, in terms of providing PaaS as a solution. I don't anticipate that is going to be an issue unless it's a cultural issue which is very little to do with technology innovations. So I don't anticipate. I think it is about somebody taking the charge. The issue might be more in terms of the investment community and in terms of the people's mentality in terms of taking risks is where the bigger problem is, rather than infrastructure or any other things like that.
May I? I think that there are some cultural kind of issues that are interrelated with sort of industry structure issues. To me, the real sort of bottleneck in the pipeline of funding is at the pre-venture capital level. If you can get to be big enough that a venture capital company is ready to invest $1 million in your company, you're doing okay in Korea or here. But I think that in Korea, it's harder to get to that point. From the friends and family money, it's really the angel stage money that's missing. Part of the other some other cultural issues, yeah, there's still a strong preference in Korean society for stable jobs. And startup companies are not stable, right? And finally, how do you get customers? If you're a startup company, even if you're in the consumer space, these days it really takes clever use of analytics to get through to the influencers and get your new application to be seen by a lot of people, for people to buy. It's hard to get to the market for the Korean startup companies, I think. And that applies even in the cloud area.
And I'm, I was very struck by the slide that you brought up, Professor Park, at the very early in your presentation when you showed how slow big data adoption was in Korea. And we've mentioned cultural reasons, we've mentioned how difficult it is to get to market. Are there any other reasons why it has been so slow? And if you are a startup, is that a reason to sort of delay building a big data company?
It all comes back to understanding the whole history of using IT, Like software was invented in early 1950s. And US companies aggressively start using computers and software from early 1950s, right? In Korea, if you look at the OECD data, the percentage of IT investment in industry out of entire fixed capital formation investment becomes greater than 0% in 1990. So there is at least 30 years and up to 40 years gap in terms of when the industry in the country started seriously investing in IT. And that's one thing. It started very late. Another thing, if you look at the history of IT in the United States, you will know that in 1980s, we called it a dark age, IT dark age in the United States. A lot of people thought IT has become irrelevant in 1980s. It couldn't produce any value for 10 years. It was well documented in many magazines like Business Week and so on. And then all of a sudden in 1990s, this third industrial revolution came in the United States, which is called the information revolution, which means for one country, for an industry in a country to fully understand how to use IT to create business value, it took 40 years for the United States. So considering these facts, Korea is just right in the verge of taking off in terms of learning and knowing truly how you utilize computers and software for business values. Right? Like if you look at big data, now it starts from spreadsheet. You work, you use spreadsheet, you look at numbers, all right? And then you move to data marts. And data marts and data warehouses. You used to say a joke like those are like spreadsheet in steroid. The same spreadsheet you see, but those numbers are not fictitious, but actual numbers extracted from the transactional database. And then you can merge all this big data into the data warehouse to use. So to see how fast a company or overall an industry in a country will absorb big data, you can look at what they are currently using. Are they using spreadsheet and work? Are they using data mart or enterprise integrated data warehouse? That's a maturity model.
Yep.
So you can jump out of no spreadsheet environment all of a sudden to big data. So the maturity model explains when actually big data will produce values to the company, thereby the companies will actually spend a lot of money in investing in big data technology.
I would actually slightly disagree with that. I think you should look at this as not as a progression that you have to just follow the US. US took 20 years, so I'm going to take 20 years is a wrong approach. There are cases where countries have completely skipped a generation of technology where US is still stuck with it. For example, credit cards. We are still stuck with the credit cards. There are countries who are using mobile phone as a credit card and they have skipped the credit cards altogether. In India, for example, there is a generation of people, large population, skipped the landlines and directly went to the mobile phones. So I understand that maturity takes time, but it also creates an opportunity to skip a generation and then go to the next level. I think there is an opportunity for Korea to skip the big data generation that US is going through and perhaps leap forward.
That's absolutely fascinating.
I have to say one thing back to him. He's criticizing
jump
me.
in. Let's get a debate.
I mean, you have to look at the consumer technology and enterprise technology differently. The consumers can adopt new technology as far as it's convenient, cheaper, they can jump in. But companies, it takes time. It takes maturity levels. And there's a lot of related things. I mean, today, like the successful big data applications can be found where companies actually embed those big data analytics into operational processes, all right? And those successful cases are mostly found in companies where big data is integrated into legacy technologies like data warehouses and the relational databases, because big data is data. It's one part of data that is helpful for running the business, and that has to be harmonized, integrated, and with the other data, transactional data and other data, to create a whole insight. So I agree that for consumer technology, you can jump. But for enterprise technology, it's hard to see such jump.
And
Respond to that? I'll let you go for the next question.
I just got one last quick question, but we can always, the audience wants to, we can continue the debate. So one other area that we need investment. And in the US, the business software market is just booming because we just have this amazing exit market. Companies like IBM and SAP have billions, and Oracle, just something ridiculous like $15 billion just to spend on M&A. So if you're starting a big data analytics startup here, chances are, you're probably going to get an acquisition offer in a year or two if you're any good. But in Korea, there's a perception I've heard that it's a little bit of a failure if your company gets acquired in a year or two. So is that going to hold back the market of really interesting big data and analytics startups?
Okay. Well, still that's a prevailing, percept. But in our case, we purchased a small data analytic company. Really, 20-some people were there, and they've been with us for more than 2 years. And we've been carrying them along many projects, and they are finding their way. The only problem of M&A by big companies is small companies is losing their identity, so they are no longer venture usually. So that's why in my practice, I do not want them work for us, but we would like to be their test bed. We would like to offer a sandbox application.
I think it will take.
Go ahead, Nagi.
I think it will take a couple of Instagram kind of acquisitions. So if you look at countries like Israel, right? So they were not ahead in terms of the technology. But if you look at what's happening in Israel, there are so many startups that are getting acquired by companies in the US. Now, Israel is probably the second biggest innovation center in the world as I see it. So I agree that there is a cultural barrier, but I think it will take few acquisitions before people realize, yes, getting acquired is a good thing in the end.
So I was going to refer back to the keynote speech by Samsung this morning. So Samsung wants to be in Silicon Valley, and I think one of the features for large companies in Silicon Valley is to be part of this open innovation system where you're acquiring startup companies as well as buying technology and product from startup companies. Google in 2011 spent $6.2 billion on company internal R&D, but it acquired 24 startup companies. It also acquired Motorola Mobility, but it acquired 24 startup companies. What happens to the company after acquisition is a big factor in whether it really is a failure or not. Is the company able to benefit from the big company relationship, whether they keep their own brand or whether they are completely absorbed by the big company? Is the idea of the startup company really brought to the forefront of creating new value? We do that really well here in the Valley, maybe better than just about anywhere in the world. And even here, it's often an ugly process, right? You see a lot of waste. But I think that when I see the big Korean companies coming here to be part of this system, this innovation system, I think that, well, you're seeing globalization, and ultimately there will be more opportunities to buy things in Korea too.
We have about a minute and a half left, so that means one question if anyone. Perfect.
I have a question to KT. Korea currently does not have an internet exchange node directly connected to the United States. It goes through Japan. Do you intend to have a trans-Pacific internet exchange node connected directly to the United States in a short period of time?
Well, that's a question. I know they do have a plan to extend our, this direct connectivity to U.S. continent, but I don't know when, because it's a subsidiary company of our group. So sorry about that. But once it's done, then it will be a very good cyber territory reunion among North America and Korea. As I explained with example with the Japanese companies, because we have a direct exchange, landing and exchange point at Gimhae area, the south of Korea. So we can offer Japanese IP in that Korean territory to Japanese companies as well, as if they the physical servers or services are located in Japan. So that kind of things will be possible.
Well, we're just perfectly running out of time. So thank you so much to our 4 incredible panelists and speakers today. And if you have any additional questions for them, you can grab them during lunch, which is happening right now. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for all of the panelists this morning. So this concludes our morning session, and it's now time to start the networking lunch. And so there are going to be lunches in 2 different locations, one in the hallway right outside of the conference room, and then the other one is in the Sedona room. And so you can join either of the lunch locations. And please come back by 12:50. Actually, I'm sorry, not 12:50. What time is what time are we starting? Okay, so please come back at 1:10, where we're going to have coffee and dessert in here, and also a raffle. Thank you.